first of all we'll just take off as much metal as we can towards the bottom pivot end, so that whilst it's fairly thick still, you know, we remove the metal and get rid of it, because we don't need all this metal down the bottom here, and we can't take serious cuts because we're only holding it by quite a small area. Now, the best way to do this is to work towards the collet rather than anything else, so that any tendency for the staff to walk out of the collet is counteracted by the pressure you're putting on the work towards the collet. We won't worry, because we know we've got quite a way to go about measurements or anything yet. So this idea of making the staff a bit longer than you actually need can get you out of a lot of holes, because sometimes when the roller heights are critical, as they are with this type of roller, it's quite convenient to have a little room to adjust things, and you can get the end shape just right, and so that when you come to a slim watch where the clearances are very close on some watches, you've got that bit of latitude to end up with the wheel clearing the centre wheel nicely and not touching the pallet cock. And you see terrible things happen on occasions when people have made that mistake. They bend the balance wheel up and they try and dish the centre wheel and do all sorts of things which wouldn't have been necessary if they had a little bit of foresight when the staff was being made, just to get the heights right. I know it can be that when you're working on a staff, the actual producing the staff is the quickest part of the operation. It's adjusting it and getting it to run nicely in the watch that takes the time. And but if you've taken that into consideration when you've done your initial inspection, you should be able to save yourself a lot of time by getting it right first time. Now we'll take the roller and present it to our turned arbor. I don't know if many of you have little trays on your T-rest, but I personally couldn't live without one. I made this tray a long while ago, and I regularly change the piece of cardboard in the bottom there, and I find that it saves a lot of problems. I have also I also have another tray which fits underneath the lathe, and I use that, as I quite often have to work in precious metals. I use that to collect the swarf. But that can be useful too when you're turning small parts and they have this tendency to leap off, and it's an added. And of course I wear a Selvet, actually, a large Selvet, as an apron under the lathe, which also is another backstop saving, because that can be dropping small parts. They're not so bad when they're this size, but when they're very small, and if you're trying to work fairly smartly, you don't want to be spending time looking for them. Well, it's getting quite slender now at this end, so we'll just see. We're keeping this tapered process going so that we know that we won't be getting too small in the finished area. You just take the roller and see how we're doing. Yes, well, it's just starting to enter. Now, normally I wouldn't use tweezers to hold a roller like this because it can be another insecurity. Of course, if I was Michael, I wouldn't think twice about it, but remembering his expertise with the dual hole at arm's length in his tweezers, I wouldn't take that kind of risk. But so I find that Rodoko, or beeswax as we used to use, is a much safer way of handling small things near the lathe. There's nothing more frustrating than to do all the work on the turning and then drop something like the roller and spend ages trying to find it. So I'll try and work as defensively as possible. Now this is working its way nicely up the taper here. This, of course, this roller to me is a bit of a large item, more like a small flywheel, so I feel quite confident to manipulate that with the tweezers. I'm just finishing off the underside of the balance seating so that we've got the depth at which the roller is to arrive at, or to seat at, because in this case the roller doesn't sit close up against the balance seat. There is a turned shoulder below the seat, so we just want to get that the right length, and I'm going to just establish that now. Putting the chamfer on the bottom of the balance seat, and we'll run down that collar that the roller ups up against. I think that's about right. Holding the pattern is a little bit difficult in this direction because it's got to be a bit of guessing, because you can't get right close to the seat because of the length of the staff. You won't go down one of the sawn slots in the collet, so you've just got to guess it. But of course, if you've got to guess it, you can always overestimate it a little bit and then adjust it later. Now you can see what's happened here. I've dropped the roller into the T-rest. That's because all's well. It hasn't gone out of sight. Perhaps there's a lesson there. I should be using the Rodoko rather than the tweezers. That's telling you how confident I was with this size. But there we are. The roller's running down the taper nicely. We continue the taper turning. Taking very light cuts, we're getting a nice finish now. Another check again. can put my thumb over the gap this time so as it can't drop into that hole. No, we're alright, we've got quite a little way to go. But another thing, because we've got quite a shallow angle on this, you have to be a little bit careful, because it will move down this taper quite quickly. There you are, you can see it's moved a considerable distance down the taper. We don't want to go right up to the shoulder. Get a bit closer so that we've just got a little bit of interference fit left to so that it goes on tapped on tight. Now you can, if you like, lap this last bit with the wigwag, of course, and you know, especially if you've got a number of pieces to fit. Some rollers come in 3 bits, and you've got 3 parts to fit. Well, obviously you don't want to take any chances, because if you overdo it, I'm afraid there's very little you can do but start again. Now we're gradually getting closer, so you could quite easily lap this last portion. I'm just taking it off with the graver, feeling confident. And we're almost there. So with that, I won't go down any lower. We could just tap it up our last little bit, because there's not much of a taper there. It's very shallow, and there's just an interference fit there, so that would hold the roller nicely. Now we set about making the bottom pivot. We just check again. It's always best to check and see where our pivot's got to be. Well, we've got quite a little bit of material there. We could, yeah, the pivot is going to be quite a bit longer than we really need, so we won't start right on the very end. I think I might take a little bit off of that end, just to be on the safe side. Now turning off the end of a slender piece like this can be a bit of a hazardous operation. So it might be wiser to stone it off. Now, I've marked it there just so that I can double check that that's about where it's got to be. Yes, that's about right. So we'll swap to a stronger glass and just take that off. Take that off gently. But as I say, used to turning small things it's likely that you wouldn't want to do this, because you might consider it's taking liberties, and I wouldn't blame you. There's no sense in being overconfident or extra clever if you're not happy about it. I've done things like this and said to myself afterwards, why did I do it that way? Why didn't I play safe? But there you are, you do these things. Well, I got away with it that time. I've shortened it nicely, turned a V and snapped off the bit. Don't ever be tempted to go right to the very end when turning off something like that, because that's a sure way to dislodge it from the collet when you turn something as fine as this, or as long as this rather. Now what I'm doing as I said before, changing gravers again,